Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear friends and subscribers, I'd like to talk about the situation in Ukraine, but the title of my presentation today is Desperate EU, UK, Desperate Zelensky, and Putin's Wrath. Basically, what I'm trying to convey is the new developments over the last week or last couple of days that actually are best summarized by these words: desperation on the part of EU, UK, the backers of Zelensky's regime in Kiev, and also Russian response. Which can be easily characterized as wrath, or very angry, or very, very strong response to the situation as it unfolds. So first, let me address the question, Zelensky, and why is he desperate? Well, the manifestation that he is desperate is his yesterday's phone call to President Trump, where he again and again pleaded for support, for security guarantees, for more weapons, for more of this, more of that. This is the same story that has been going on for quite some time. But the reason he's more desperate perhaps now than before is that he is facing not only really a very, very strong hit on Kiev by Russian missiles that continues day after day, and the accelerated Russian advance in Donbass. Not only is he feeling the pressure from President Trump to come up and agree to some kind of a deal with the Russians before it is too late in Geneva, but a new element is, over the last few days, is the new threat from Mr. Zaluzhny. As I have discussed in many of my preceding videos, he faces a very serious opposition in Ukraine, and primarily from people to the right, so to speak, more nationalists like him, but who want to replace him. Zaluzhny, as we all know, was the commander-in-chief during the offensive of 2023, and then he was removed by Zelensky precisely because he was a popular general and sent off into an honorary exile as the ambassador in London. But Zaluzhny, of course, made good use of his time in London and created all kinds of contacts and supports and everything, and now he has come up with an open criticism of Zelensky, that during the offensive of 2023, instead of following the plan that he, Zaluzhny, proposed, Zelensky went into PR campaign in Kursk, which was a hopeless undertaking but was a good PR stunt, and deflected major Ukrainian forces away from the offensive, which, according to Zaluzhny, did not go as well as it could have, because of Zelensky's decision. So in other words, Zelensky is isolated. Not only he's not given much support anymore, except applause, which he adores, and all kinds of encouragement, but the flow of weapons is not what it used to be. So there's definitely a fear on behalf of Zelensky that there may be a replacement, and he spoke about that in one of his latest interviews. Now, what I find most interesting in the recent developments is the decision of Ukrainians and Europeans to move the military production to Europe. As I already said, there was this missile that everybody believes it's a British aid, or maybe even a British missile under the Ukrainian name called Flamingo, which some other reports said is made in Denmark. But what you see on your screen is the example of an announcement in Kiev Post, which is a pro-Zelensky newspaper in Kiev, which openly declares opening up of joint projects on war material production in Britain, and then right after that in France, which actually confirms with their own sources that the decisions have been made to help Ukraine by moving the production away from Russian bombs to European countries. Specifically, we have documented evidence of Denmark, Britain, and France. The most worrying for the Russians was that a few days ago there was a Flamingo missile that hit Votkinsk, which is a nuclear facility, which is a big factory that produces missiles and all kinds of other equipment that the Russians consider a part of their nuclear shield. So obviously this is what caused the wrath, the anger, and all kinds of responses from Russian generals, which I listen to regularly, and one of them you see now on the screens, which basically said that the response should be nuclear. If they attack our nuclear facilities, we should attack their nuclear facilities and not shy away from defending our infrastructure, nuclear infrastructure. Now, before I move to the Russian responses, what's interesting is that the coalition of the willing has suffered a serious setback in the last few days, which is that Ursula von der Leyen and Kallas and all these other Russia haters were preparing a 20th package of sanctions against Russia and did not go through. This was a big failure. In that they tried to ban Russian vessels from any ports and try to strengthen what they call struggle against Russian shadow fleet. And I already discussed it many times. There's nothing shadow about it. It's just commercial vessels that are shipping Russian oil. And many a times these are not vessels registered in Russia, but nevertheless the French and others harass them regularly, going on the brink of a breach of international law. But nevertheless, the Russians have been so far quite patient, announcing simply that they would respond by forceful means if indeed Russian vessels are attacked or seized. But this setback was that Greece and Malta, the two countries in the Mediterranean that have a big stake in shipping business, and Greece as the owner of many tankers, they blocked this decision to do the 20th sanctions package. And also it seems like Slovakia and Hungary are in a big row with Zelensky about Zelensky's blocking delivery of Russian oil through the friendship pipeline. And now there are threats to cut off electricity supply from Slovakia to Ukraine. So in other words, all of that is the big setbacks for the European Union and UK. And what they responded with is very interesting. If you look at the press coverage of the last few days or a week, the more they suffered setbacks, the more they intensify the campaign of propaganda that Russian economy is collapsing, that Russian attrition rate is 10 times worse than that of Ukraine, that Russians are losing just a little bit more help, a little bit more Ukrainian weapons, and then the Russian front is going to collapse and Ukraine is going to win. There's an interesting correlation between the success of Russian offensive and the loudness of Western cries that Russia is losing the war. Now, let me move on now to the Russian wrath, or as I put in, Putin's wrath, over two things. Primarily, these are two very important developments. One is the Flamingo missile attack on Votkinsk nuclear facility, which is a factory, and it is secret, it's classified what exactly is produced there, but it is a strategic asset of Russia. That's number one. And the second one that produced quite a big scandal in Russia and also in Western media as well, and that is the announcement by the SVR, which means Service of External Intelligence of Russia. They published in Russian, and there's no English text, but what you see on your screen now is the Russian text of the official announcement by the intelligence service, to the effect that according to them and the data that they have, the British and the French were discussing and were considering providing nuclear device or components for a device from ostensibly a French missile to Ukraine, in order to enable Ukraine to have a better negotiating position vis-a-vis the Russians. Now, it's so interesting that for many years, Zelensky had been dreaming of having a nuclear weapon. In fact, the war, those of you who remember history, Zelensky's speech at the Munich Security Conference in 2022, on the very eve of the resumption of hostilities in February 2022. He spoke about nuclear weapons and Ukrainian desire to have nuclear weapons, and Ukrainians regret that they agreed to abandon nuclear weapons in the Budapest Memorandum of 1996. Now, let me just make clear, those of you who are not familiar with the subject, Ukraine never had any nuclear weapons. The only nuclear weapons that there were in Ukraine were not Ukrainian, they were Soviet era nuclear weapons that stayed on the territory of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic once it regained independence. And Ukraine officials never had any access to these weapons. They were under Russian control. And the Americans agreed with that and wanted it that way. And this is why the Memorandum of 1996 was passed. In other words, it was a mutual agreement of the US and Russian Federation that Ukraine should not have any nuclear weapons, in accord with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In other words, this is why it made such a big splash or wrath on the Russian part, is that the British and French plans, if they are real, would mean a drastic violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And this is why they took it very seriously. Now, the West, of course, denies all of this, but Ushakov, and he's a serious man, he's the advisor to President Putin, he said yesterday that the evidence to the effect that the British and the French were considering providing Ukraine with nuclear device or parts of the device was officially delivered to the United States of America. Now, that means to me that it's not empty words. If there is some kind of evidence that they decided is worthy to provide it to the United States, it's probably more than just words and conversations in some meeting. So, obviously, it is classified, and I don't know, nobody knows what exactly this evidence is, but there is a fact that the Russians have delivered, according to Ushakov, this evidence to the United States. This caused a huge Russian reaction, and the discussions are going on in Russian media and among Russian generals. And so what you see on your screens now is one of those generals discussing what Russia should do in response. And here's the kind of a consensus that I can see emerging from various sources. Number one, Russian offensive is to speed up, and it has sped up. The offensive is going full steam in Donbass now that they are approaching the last two fortified strongholds in Donbass, Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. The plans are that this spring they expect to seize those last two remaining strongholds with fortifications that the Ukrainians have been building for the last 10 years. Now, there's also an open talk about offensive going on to Odessa. Now, again, Putin is not on record by announcing in advance what the Russians are going to do. Obviously, this is a state secret, but the discussions are going on that it is necessary for Russia to take Odessa, and this is a liberation under the code name, or the way they refer to it, is a liberation of Novorossiya, which I discussed in many of my preceding videos. Now, the negotiations in Geneva are hardly mentioned at all in Russian media. Obviously, they are not taken seriously anymore, and they're just going through the motions. And all this talk about Zelensky's dreams of meeting the two presidents, Trump and Putin at the same time, and signing a big compromise. Nobody's taking seriously that anymore. This is passé. No negotiations with Zelensky, and if you listen to the Russian generals, they refer to him as, at best, as a Zelensky regime, and at worst as a drug addict that has to be seized and put on trial. Now, it seems that the very interesting discussion is going on among the Russians as to what is going to happen to the rest of Ukraine. And very briefly, it is that there is a kind of emerging consensus that all of Novorossiya should be part of the Russian Federation. That means from Odessa to Nikolaev and Dnepropetrovsk and to Kharkov. Now then, there's also discussion, what about central Ukraine? And there are various plans or discussions. One would be that it would be autonomous, a republic within the Russian Federation, or it could be an independent state but closely linked to Russia, like Belarus, with the treaty obligations. And then there is a third part, which is Western Ukraine, which nobody wants to have within the Russian Federation, because this is the birthplace of Bandera and Banderovite movement, and that should be put under international supervision or Russian control to make sure that there's no neo-Nazi danger arising from this territory. So this is where we are, my dear friends. I invite you to please put your likes if you do. Listen to my other podcasts on Russian history, Soviet history, Ukraine war. I also invite you to read my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, which is in the description, and the picture of it is here. And I'm also very happy to tell you that I received a word from my publisher that this book will come out in Portuguese this year. I don't know why they chose Portuguese. I guess they have their reasons, but this is good news for me, and I invite you to read my books. Thank you very much. Goodbye.